Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome back to CASE Documentaries. I bring you true crime, disturbing stories and other things that you may later regret knowing with regular uploads every week. Please do join the quickly growing, incredibly supportive CASE family by hitting subscribe now and turning on notifications. Thank you so much to all of my patrons. If your name is on screen right now, then you're a legend. Our love and respect goes out to all those that knew and loved Michelle and all those affected by this dark case. In 1991, Michelle Stewart was born to Kenny and Josephine Stewart. She grew up in Ayrshire, Scotland, the youngest of 4 siblings. Michelle's other siblings were considerably older than she was, but despite the age difference, Michelle was very close to all of them. As the baby of the family, Michelle was doted on by everyone in the household. She was surrounded by love and was often the centre of attention in her family, especially on Christmas and birthdays because, as the youngest, she often showed her excitement and joy on those special days. Michelle enjoyed a great deal of family support, but she also faced a challenge that many other children don't have to worry about. She was born with clubfoot, a fairly common birth defect. This condition required her to have several surgeries during her younger years. Clubfoot is where a child's foot is twisted out of a normal position, and the tendons in the foot are shorter than they typically should be. Since clubfoot can make it difficult to walk normally, it is often treated soon after a child is born. While this is a physical condition, it can also cause children to struggle with self-esteem issues. This can be especially true during their adolescent years. Sometimes they may not be able to walk with a normal gait. Even though the condition could be painful at times, Michelle didn't let it slow her down. She always tried to participate in all the activities that other kids her age did. Despite her earlier issues with clubfoot, as Michelle approached her teenage years, she had turned into a confident and beautiful girl with piercing blue eyes. Like most teenagers, Michelle was looking forward to a couple of life's major milestones. These included being able to drive and falling in love. When Michelle was just 14 years old, her family found out that she had been talking and spending time with a 17-year-old boy, a young man named John Wilson. Wilson had grown up just a few miles away from Michelle, but he didn't have as rosy of an upbringing as she did. He didn't seem to have as much love and support as Michelle did in her home life. The two had plenty of differences, but despite that, they felt a connection that brought the two of them together. As the two teens kept spending more time together, they began getting closer. By the time Michelle's family learned of the relationship, the two had strong feelings for one another. Michelle's family wasn't thrilled with the idea of her spending time with Wilson. This was mainly because of his family's reputation in the area and the fact that he was 3 years older than she was. Michelle, however, brushed aside her family's concerns. She was determined to continue seeing Wilson, who was her first serious relationship. Michelle's family relented and tried to get to know Wilson despite their misgivings. He was quiet but pleasant and would chat with Michelle's family when he saw them. The two seemed happy to spend time together, and they did seem to get along from what Michelle's family could see. While he did conduct himself well around Michelle's family, Wilson didn't display the same model behaviour when he was away from them. He began to earn a reputation as a troublemaker, with the police even being involved in some of his more serious instances. In the first year after Michelle's family met him, Wilson had been arrested on a racially motivated charge. A later conviction that happened when he was 17 years old raised another major red flag for Michelle's family. He had tossed a lit firework onto a bus filled with school-aged children. Some people might have written it off as a thoughtless prank, a careless trick played by a young man who hadn't considered how his actions might hurt others. But altogether, this added to the growing list of Wilson's questionable behaviour. The Stewart family had also heard concerning tales about Wilson's behaviour changing towards Michelle. He had allegedly hit Michelle on one occasion when he couldn't control his emotions. His bad temper seemed to be a recurring theme. He was also known to punch walls when frustrated. In October of 2008, Michelle found out that her boyfriend had been contacting adult-only phone lines. This was something that obviously upset her, so she decided to break things off. Like many teenagers, she had begun to figure out what she wanted out of a relationship, and therefore she realized that Wilson fell very short of her expectations. However, he wouldn't accept that the relationship was over. He tried multiple times to win Michelle back. When that didn't work, he began to stalk Michelle to make her feel scared and uncomfortable. She continued to refuse to speak with him. Her family members even stepped in to tell him that she didn't want to see him. His pleas for reconciliation were ignored, with Michelle likely hoping he would lose interest and simply move on. You know, what normal people do. Wilson, however, refused to move on. He continued with constant phone calls and harassment. This barrage of calls was so serious that Michelle decided to change her phone number. The rejection that Wilson felt over the breakup caused his already volatile temper to rage out of control, and his stalking continued. Enduring 1 month of Wilson's stalking and harassment had created a huge change in Michelle's life. She had started to become anxious and didn't leave her house very often. One of the only reasons she would leave would be to attend school. When Wilson realized he wasn't going to get the reconciliation that he had hoped for, his thoughts turned darker and to revenge instead. The idea of making Michelle suffer took root in his mind. Meanwhile, Michelle was working hard to put the trauma of her past relationship behind her. She was ready to move on. She had taken steps to begin making her goals and dreams come true. With her 18th birthday approaching in November of 2008, she had begun taking driving lessons so she could realize her goal of getting her license. This was another major milestone that she was incredibly excited about. Michelle had also been thinking about what kind of career she'd like to have as an adult, settling on the idea of becoming a secretary within the police force, something that would further distance herself from Wilson. On November the 14th, 2008, approximately 6 weeks after breaking up with Wilson, Michelle went to school as usual in her small village. She returned home after school like any other ordinary day. Some of Michelle's friends knocked on her door. They asked her to accompany them on a walk to the shop in the village. The plan was they'd go there to buy some sweets or candy. Although she had mainly stayed at home after the past few weeks since her breakup with Wilson, Michelle agreed to go with her friends. Since she was still having issues with her ex stalking her, having these friends with her likely made Michelle feel more secure about her safety. She at least must have felt safer than she would have felt walking the streets by herself. She and her friends left the shop at approximately 6:30 p.m. and then Wilson came up to the group, insisting that Michelle talk to him. It was no accident that Wilson had stumbled upon Michelle outside of the shop. He had taken 2 buses from his home to lurk outside the shop where he knew Michelle liked to go when she wanted a sweet treat. A brief, heated conversation ensued between the ex-partners, while her friends stood by and witnessed the exchange. Michelle apparently tried to walk away from the situation, but Wilson had other plans. Enraged, Wilson drew out a long, sharp kitchen implement that he had been carrying with him, and he then began to attack Michelle from behind. Michelle attempted to defend herself from the attack, but it happened so fast and with such fury that there was no way for her to ward him off. During the brief but terrifying incident, Michelle was jabbed a total of 10 times as her brave friends tried to pull Wilson off of her. Although the attack was shockingly fast, there were still several witnesses around who saw it happen. Wilson then ran off even though he knew several witnesses will be able to identify him as the assailant. Meanwhile, Michelle's shocked friends tried to process what had just happened, and they now tried to help her. As she laid on the ground, Michelle told her friends, "He stabbed me." Word quickly got out about the attack. Michelle's family arrived at the scene one by one to see if Michelle was okay. Michelle's sister Lisa had been called by her mother. She had been notified that something was wrong when a friend came to her door. She shared the information that there was an accident outside of the shops. But as we know, this was no accident. Since Lisa lived nearer to the shops, her mother asked her if she could go to the scene to see what had happened. When Lisa arrived, she saw a crowd of people standing around someone on the floor. When she asked where her sister was, the crowd moved aside. That's when Lisa saw Sister Michelle on the ground. Shortly after that, Michelle's mother arrived on the scene, seeing a sight no parent should ever have to witness. CPR was performed on Michelle in an effort to save her life. Local residents tried to keep her alive until paramedics could get her to the hospital. One of the people who tried to help Michelle was her own brother, Kenny. He was a nurse who was horrified to learn that Michelle had been injured, and he raced to the scene to check on her. After being rushed to the hospital, the doctor had to let Michelle's devastated family know that there was nothing that could be done to save her life. Michelle, the young girl with a promising future, would never see her 18th birthday. She had passed away due to the injuries she received during the attack. Although Michelle was the one who had lost her life, there were many victims that day. Her friends would forever have the memories of that sudden, brutal attack, something so terrible happening to a dear friend, etched into their minds. Michelle's parents and siblings were left trying to deal with their grief, as well as the fact that the young man they had welcomed into their home was the same person who had taken Michelle away from them. They were robbed of the opportunity to see Michelle reach all of the goals she'd been looking forward to. Getting her driving license, starting her career, and someday having a family of her own. What seemed like an ordinary day had rapidly turned into the most tragic day of their lives. Witnesses from the scene, including Michelle's friends, immediately let authorities know that Wilson was a person that had attacked Michelle. With so many witnesses placing him at the scene and pinpointing him as the culprit, the evidence against Wilson was overwhelming. Wilson, who had just committed the worst crime of his life, showed up at his family's home after he fled the scene of the attack. Just hours later, police arrested him for the crime. Wilson appeared in court in March of 2009, and with the overwhelming evidence against him, he didn't try to fight the charges. Whilst he didn't deny ending Michelle's life, her family noticed he never once showed any remorse for his actions. The death was also suspected to be premeditated. This was since Wilson had been carrying the 10-inch sharp implement with him, and he was known to be stalking Michelle's whereabouts on the night of her passing. Just as Michelle's family had noticed, the judge in the case also remarked that Wilson hadn't shown any remorse for the crime. The court was made aware of Wilson's past criminal history, a pretty dark history that illustrated his racist views, along with the complete disregard for the safety of school children in the firework incident. It was clear, even before his attack upon Michelle, that Wilson didn't mind being on the wrong side of the law. As part of a plea bargain, instead of requesting a jury trial, Wilson pled guilty for Michelle's death and he received his sentence in April of 2009. Whilst plea bargains save courts a lot of time and expense since jury trials aren't required, they can often mean more favourable sentences for the alleged criminals. Wilson's guilty plea should have created a small sense of closure for Michelle's family, a family that was still struggling with the loss of their beloved daughter and sister. Instead, the sentence he was given shocked and enraged them. For the vicious attack, Wilson received a life sentence, but he is required to serve a minimum of only 12 years. That meant by the time he would turn 32, he stood a chance of being released from prison. He would be free to live his life, even though he had cut Michelle's life short by many decades. In 2023, after serving 15 years so far for the crime, Wilson's attempt at receiving parole was denied by the Scottish Parole Board, although he has spent some time out of prison as part of a temporary release program. Do you think the punishment fits the crime here? What do you think could be done to avoid something like this happening again in the future? please do let me know down in the comments. And remember, if you appreciate what I'm doing here, please do hit that like button. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.